Finally, we are out with requirement 6 of PCI DSS 4.0 as we navigate from the summary of changes from version 3.2.1 to 4.0. Earlier 5 videos, you should see it. They are really something that you cannot miss. Now, in this video, we often take up questions asked by our viewers and clients relating to various topics relevant to the cybersecurity industry. And in this video and the series for that matter, the summary of changes on from 3.2.1 to 4.0, taking into consideration questions that has been asked by our viewers and our clients and experience across the years in working on PCI DSS. So today we'll be doing requirement 6. Let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, which is a treasure trove of information on various industry standards such as PCI DSS, PCI SSF, GDPR, HIPAA, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, even ethical hacking. So there are many things that you can see over there, and most of it, rather. So diving straight in, earlier for PCI DSS 3.2.1, requirement 6 was titled as Develop and Maintain Secure Systems and Applications. Now what has happened is the title has been changed to Develop and Maintain Secure Systems and Software. So the applications became softwares, all right? And as a clarification, requirement 6 applies to all system components except for requirement 6.2, which applies only to bespoke and custom software. But don't worry, don't get confused. We'll go through it as we come to that requirement. The first thing that changed, PCI DSS 3.2.1, requirement 6.1, it spoke about establishing a process to identify security vulnerabilities using reputable outside sources for security vulnerability information, and then assign a ranking, risk ranking, for example, such as medium, high, low, to newly discovered security vulnerabilities. Now, this has been shifted. Requirement 6.3 under PCI DSS 4.0 is given as identifying security vulnerabilities and protecting system components from vulnerability via patching. And the new point that is covered is requirement 6.3.1, which includes an additional bullet which clarifies applicability to vulnerabilities for bespoke and custom and third-party software. So this is a new clarification that has been added. For requirement 6.2 under PCI DSS 3.2.1, it speaks about ensuring that all system components and softwares are protected from known vulnerabilities by installing applicable vendor-supplied security patches. Further, it also speaks that the need to install critical security patches within 1 month of release, not 1 month of you knowing about it, 1 month of release by the OEM. Now, under PCI DSS 4.0, this is requirement 6.3, and it speaks about all system components being protected from known vulnerabilities by installing applicable security patches and updates. It further also mentions the need to install critical or high security patches and updates within 1 month of release. But these patches and updates have to be identified according to the risk ranking process, which is elaborated in requirement 6.3.1. Then requirement 6.3 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it speaks about developing internal and external applications, including web-based administrative access to applications, securely in accordance with PCI DSS and as per industry standards and/or best practice by incorporating information security throughout the software development lifecycle. This requirement is now 6.2.1 under PCI DSS 4.0, and here it speaks about developing bespoke and custom software securely based on industry standards and or best practices and in accordance with PCI DSS by incorporating and considering information security issues during each stage of the software development lifecycle. So it is by and large, if I might say this, by and large the same. Earlier it was about speaking about internal and external software, now it is bespoke and custom softwares. Now requirement 6.3.1 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it spoke about removing development test and or custom application accounts, user IDs and passwords before the application becomes active or is released to the customers. Now both this requirement 6.3.1 and 6.3.2 is now covered under PCI DSS 6.2.3 in version 4. And here it is written as review bespoke and custom software prior to being released into production or to customers to identify and correct potential coding vulnerabilities and to ensure code is developed according to secure coding guidelines. Now, these requirements also talks about code reviews that are required to identify both existing and emerging software vulnerabilities and to ensure appropriate corrections are implemented prior to release. Now, requirement 6.3.2 under PCI DSS 3.2.1, it spoke about reviewing customer code prior to release to production or customers in order to identify any potential coding vulnerabilities using either manual or automated processes to include code changes that are required to be reviewed by individuals other than the originating code author, by individuals knowledgeable about code review techniques and secure coding practices. The next thing it spoke about was code review to ensure code was developed according to secure coding guidelines. Now, the secure coding guidelines has to be documented in advance, of course, by the company, and then appropriate corrections were implemented prior to release and reviewed and approved by management prior to release. Now, the same thing is carried forward under 6.2.3.1 under PCI DSS 4. And it speaks about, again, by and large the same. That is, manual code reviews are performed for bespoke and custom software prior to release to production. Then code changes must be reviewed by individuals other than originating code author and who are knowledgeable about code review techniques and secure coding practices. Now, this should further be reviewed and approved by management prior to release. So again, by and large, it's the same. And if I summarize it, requirement number 6.3.2 of PCI DSS 3.2.1 was essentially moved to requirement 6.2.3 and requirement 6.2.3.1 of PCI DSS 4. Then the requirements are split to separate general code review practices from those manual code reviews are performed. There is just like a bifurcation and providing more clarity that I saw in this control. Requirement 6.4.1 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it spoke about the need to separate development and test environments from production environments and enforce the separation with access control. The same has now been moved to 6.5.3, which also addresses the need for separate pre-production. Of course, the wording changed. Pre-production environments from production environments and the separation to be enforced with appropriate access control. 6.4.2 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it covers the need for separation of duties also between development and test and production environment. But we see under requirement 6.5.4 of PCI DSS 4.0 essentially changed from development and test and production, development and test and production to production and pre-production. That's it. And then change the term separation of the duties, and which clarified that the separation of roles and functions between production and pre-production is intended to provide accountability so that only approved changes are deployed. Moving on, requirement 6.4.3 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it speaks about ensuring that production data, which is lifespans, are not used for testing or development. But under 6.5.5 of PCI DSS 4, it mentions that lifespans do not be used under pre-production environment except where those environments are included in the CDE and protected in accordance with applicable PCI DSS requirements. Now, this is like a no-brainer actually, but I'm glad the council did provide this update. Essentially, in the earlier version, because you can't have it in the UAT and testing, in the development and test environment, but now they're saying if you're having it, that's fine, but you need to cover that also in the CDE. Now, the second thing is that lifespans can be used if they're part of the environment is a part of PCI DSS scope. That's it. Now, moving on, PCI DSS 3.2.1 requirement 6.4.4, it speaks about remove test data and accounts from system components before system becomes active or goes into production. Now, PCI DSS 4 requirement 6.5.6, it speaks about test data and test accounts should be removed from system components before the system goes into production. Now, requirement 6.4.5 or PCI DSS 3.2.1, it speaks that change control procedures must include documentation of impact, then documented change approval by authorized parties, then functionality testing to verify that the change does not adversely impact the security of the system, and last but not the least, having in place a backup procedure. Now, this requirement 6.4.5 or PCI DSS 3.2.1 is covered in the latest version under PCI DSS 4 requirement 6.5.1. And this requirement 6.5.1 talks about changes to all system components in the production environment has to be made according to the established procedures only. And these established procedures should include the first thing, reason for and description of the change, documentation of the security impact, documented change approval by authorized parties, then testing to verify that the change does not adversely impact system security. And then finally, for a bespoke custom software change, all updates are tested for compliance with PCI DSS 4 requirement 6.2.4 before deploying into production. We'll come to what this requirement is, don't worry. And then procedures to address failures and return to a secure state in case a change fails. So next, coming to PCI DSS requirement 6.4.6 as per version 3.2.1, and it mentions about completion of a significant change. All relevant PCI DSS requirements must be implemented on all new or change systems and networks, and documentation updated as applicable. Now the same thing is now addressed under requirement 6.5.2 of PCI DSS 4.0, and this requirement 6.5.2 mentions that upon completion of a significant change, all PCI DSS requirements are confirmed to be in place on all new and changed systems and networks, and their documentation is updated as applicable. And last but not the least, these significant changes should also be captured and reflected in the entity's PCI DSS scope confirmation activities. Under PCI DSS 4, scoping has to be done on a regular basis through the entire cycle and not just like a one-time activity under PCI DSS 3.2.1. Now moving on to the next requirement, 6.5 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it talks about addressing the common coding vulnerabilities in software by one, training developers at least annually with up-to-date secure coding techniques, which also includes how to avoid common coding vulnerabilities. And then developing applications based on secure coding guidelines. This requirement, 6.5 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, is now addressed in requirement 6.2.2 of PCI DSS 4. So what was done was there a movement of the requirements under 6.2 of PCI DSS 4. Now the PCI DSS 4.0 requirement 6.2 talks about software development personnel working on bespoke and custom software to be trained at least once every 12 months as follows. On software security relevant to the jobs function and development languages, of course. So what is the base requirement? As per whatever language they're developing it. And then including secure software design and secure coding techniques. And it should also include, if secure testing tools are used, how to use those for detecting vulnerabilities in the software. Now this is something which is lesser known, but let me tell you that it is very interesting and very important that developers know that they can at least do a first level check of the software for vulnerabilities. So this way they'll even become better programmers instead of then going for doing a VA and then finding the vulnerabilities, and then people are starting to wonder how this thing will be closed. So this is always a better way. I'm not saying that the end testing should not be done on the product. I'm simply saying that we can introduce one more level of testing at the developer level itself. Okay, now further requirement 6.5.1 to 6.5.1.0. This earlier would comment on how to develop and even test parameters for software for security testing under PCI DSS 3.2.1. It is now combined and moved to the requirement 6.2.4 of PCI DSS 4 for addressing common coding vulnerabilities to align all software development content again under requirement 6.2. Now this requirement 6.2.4 of PCI DSS 4 mentions that software engineering techniques or other methods that are defined and in use by software development personnel shall prevent or mitigate common software attacks and other related vulnerabilities, including but not limited to the following. And you can see on your screen the listing of all the attacks that should be covered in a software assessment. Then this can also be used by the software development person to improve their coding practices so that these findings do not even come up in the assessment. So all the requirement 6.5.1 to 1.0 is now clubbed under 6.2.4 instead of separate line items. Now moving to the requirement 6.6 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it mentions that for web-facing public applications, addressing new threats and vulnerabilities should be on an ongoing basis and ensure that these applications are protected against known attacks by either of the following methods. Okay, so the number one is reviewing public facing web applications via manual or automated web AppSec vulnerability assessment, at least annually or after any changes. And then installing an automated technical solution that detects and prevents web attacks. For example, a WAF. This was there in place for a very long time. Now, under PCI DSS 4.0, this is now moved to as requirement 6.4.1 to address the new threats and vulnerabilities for public facing web application under requirement 6.4. Now, further relating to the public facing web applications, PCI DSS 4.0 also introduced a new requirement 6.4.2 that talks about deploying an automated technical solution for public facing web application that continuously detects and prevents the web attacks. This new requirement also removes the option in requirement 6.4.1 to review web application via manual or automated vulnerability assessment tools. But this is being a new requirement will be a best practice until 31st March 2025. Now, another new requirement introduced in this version of PCI DSS 4 is requirement 6.4.3. Now, stay with me on this, okay, and try and understand, which is for the management of the payments paid script. Now, this is an extremely interesting and required update which is come in the standard. So, this requirement talks about managing consumer browser by following. One, a method is implemented to confirm that each script is authorized, and a method is implemented to ensure the integrity of the script, and an inventory of all the script that is maintained with written justification as to why you need the script. And then requirement 6.7 of PCI DSS 3.2.1, it mentions about ensuring that security policies and operational procedures for developing and maintaining secure applications and systems are documented, in use, and known to all affected parties. Now, the same requirement is addressed under requirement 6.1.1 of PCI DSS 4, which also talks about the need to ensure all security policies and operational procedures that are identified in requirement 6, which is develop and maintain secure systems and softwares, are documented, kept up to date, in use, and known to all affected parties. So, dear friends, with this, we close the summary of changes for requirement 6 for PCI DSS 3.2.1 to require to version 4. And I really hope that this video turns out to be very useful to you and clears all your doubts. Now, to learn the changes in the other requirements for 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 5 more to go, do subscribe to our channel so you get updated and pinged as soon as something new is released. Now, in the next video, I'll be covering PCI DSS requirement 7, and same summary of changes between 3.2.1 and 4.0. And also stay tuned for our upcoming webinar on the latest requirements under PCI standards, SOC 1, SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA. It's going to be really, really good. And we also recommend our viewers to share your very valuable feedback on how to make this video more useful to you. And if you have any queries that you want to be discussed online or in the next video, do write to us at askus@vestainfosec.com. So, my friends, thank you again for gracing us with your presence, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.